Hey, this is Gordon for First-Person Touch, and in this video we're gonna create a Viking shield in 3ds Max and Substance Painter. So please like this video, and thank you for my Patreons for helping me creating these tutorials. Okay, the first thing we're gonna do is of course to create the high poly model, and we're gonna start off with creating a cylinder. This is gonna be actually the basic shape or how the shield is gonna look like after we finish it. So a cylinder is gonna be probably the best start for creating this model here. And of course we're gonna set a good number, a high number of sides for the cylinder because it's gonna be big, and this is gonna allow us to navigate seamlessly and kind of smoothly and create the shapes we are looking for. Okay, and I guess the first thing I'm gonna do here is actually to get rid of the most of this cylinder we created, because we want to take care of the borders or the kind of the outer edge or the rim of the shield. So we're probably gonna get rid of most of this, and we're gonna only work with a small portion of it because it is necessary in order to kind of create something. Then we're gonna replicate it and copy it all over to get that kind of the outer edge or that rim back once again. And this is gonna allow us to avoid repetition and to be actually is gonna allow us to create something very accurate. So we're gonna actually keep removing these parts until we get to this point here. So we're gonna copy this over to the other side, and after that we better use an array here because it's gonna be much more accurate. So first of all, we're gonna try to try it out, because there is gonna be a process of trial and error, since we have to find the right angle and the right axis we're gonna copy it over, and this is gonna be extremely important. Then as you can see, we're gonna convert this to a poly as one piece, and then we're gonna create more copies. So as you can see here, we copied it over using the array tool, 45 degrees on the z-axis or on the y-axis, depending on which view you're looking from. And this is gonna be this is gonna be extremely important. Now what we are doing right now is gonna be we're gonna attach everything together. So all these pieces are gonna be attached back together as one piece, and we're gonna select every vertex where these pieces are gonna meet each other, and we're gonna weld all these vertices together because basically they are separated. And now we can weld them together to end up with a whole one piece, and a piece that is gonna be kind of one unit. We don't want to keep them separate, and some beginners are kind of deal with this problem, which is they don't realize that the pieces that they copied are separated, and they need to bring them back to become one piece in order to continue working and achieve what else or what other stuff there are coming after that process. And now, as you can see, I'm adding the shell modifier, which is going to be extremely important in order to give thickness to this flat surface. And you can also add an extrude modifier, which is going to be working almost the same, but I think the shell modifier is gonna be the one that we're gonna rely on most of the time, because it's gonna be like the thing in order to give thickness to any element. Now I'm going to actually, so now as you can see, we're trying to actually separate these pieces of wood, or this is gonna be actually an interesting process to go through, especially when we start adding when we start adding the high poly details. Is going to be interesting. So now as you can see, this ring right there is going to be is finished for now, and what we need right now is to create this hemisphere in the very center of the shield, because this is going to be actually going through the wood to the other side, because we're going to need some handles from the other side where the soldier is gonna hold it. And it's not gonna be that complicated of a piece. It's just very simple. We need also few screws or nails or whatever on top, because it gives the illusion that it is nailed right there. And it's something we see a lot in these kind of weapons and models. There are some patterns, repetitive patterns, that we're going to see a lot through the modeling of some kind of weapons and models like these. Okay, and we're gonna copy it over to the other side, on top of the ring, or top of that rim, and the size is gonna change, of course, because it's gonna be bigger for some reason. And you better not move the vertices, but just scale up as a unit, as an element, not as vertices, because the other nails in the center of the shield are going to be affected. So we want them to be the same but not the same size. Okay, now what we are going to do is actually we're going to create the other side of this hemisphere in the center of the shield. And as I explained before, we are going to create a handle from the other side. So yeah, it's going to be simple. But before we do this, you can see right now that I'm connecting all the vertices together, and this is going to be very important because we cannot leave it as it is right now. We cannot leave vertices hanging right there without any kind of support and without any kind of connection between them. And we don't have to connect everything actually, because if we have quads, if we have 4 sides on each polygon, it's gonna be enough, especially if the supporting edges, which is the process we're gonna work on later, is gonna actually do its job properly. So for now, our biggest concern right here is to create that hole inside of the wood, and to carve that wood, and to delete the parts that we don't really need, to allow that piece of metal in the center of the shield to do its job. So as you can see here, I am kind of aligning these vertices to the rim, or to the outer edge of this cylinder in the center of the shield, in order to delete the parts that are not going to be necessary, and of course to create that hole. And we better actually create something that is going to be symmetrical, because we want to see something that looks like a circle or cylinder. And this is even though it's not going to be perfectly visible, it's going to be a problem if we don't take care of that just the proper way. Okay, now we can apply the shell modifier in order to actually give it some thickness, since from the inner side it's a little bit it's kind of thick, and it's gonna be smaller from the side where we're gonna create the handle. And to emphasize this even more, we need to actually convert this to a poly, and then we're gonna scale it down. And to do this, we're gonna use the grow tool right there in the edible poly, and we're gonna scale it down in order to make it a little bit thicker from the inside, and we're gonna push it outside back a little bit, and we're gonna create an edge right there to allow ourselves to extrude these edges. Kind of they are kind of an arrow shape right there, and we need to actually change the materials in order to see better, because I think that color is too bright for some reason. And we can now change some of the parameters of this model here, and we can extrude these as I said before. They're gonna look like an arrow, one pointing upward and one pointing to the downside. And we're gonna use the scaling tool in order to do this. It's not going to be big a deal. I sometimes like working on some of the simplest stuff like these, because I think the texturing is gonna do the heavy lifting for us, and in the texturing process, we're gonna see a lot more progress. But regardless, here I'm trying to create the handle that I talked about is going to be inside the is going to be inside this hemisphere, and it's going to allow ourselves or allow the software that is going to use the shield to have a solid grip on it, especially in combat. There is kind of you need something strong uh, to hold kind of your hand needs actually to have a solid grip on something that is gonna be hard to let go of. And right now I am actually trying to create or copy these pins or nails or whatever they are to some of the areas that we actually need to copy it to. And right now also I'm trying to actually kind of create some interesting stuff here. So what are we basically doing is actually selecting the edges where we're gonna see these pieces of wood that create the base or the basic geometry for the shield. We're gonna try to separate them, and these pieces of wood are gonna be completely separated, not completely in the sense that they are gonna be separate elements, but we're gonna kind of convey the message that they are separate blocks of wood, and they are or we are, and what we are gonna basically technically do is we're gonna extrude the areas that extrude negatively, which means that we're gonna extrude with a minus value, or we're gonna extrude with a positive value the areas that they're not gonna be carved, and the both ways are gonna work. So now we are gonna add some supporting edges, and supporting edges. If we start working on the supporting edges, it means that any further modification on the base mesh is going to be a little bit difficult to work on. So when you start doing supporting edges, you better make sure that that you covered everything and you're ready to jump to the next step, which is creating the high details of the high poly model. And as you can see here, I am trying to actually select certain area here because in order to do supporting edges when it comes to cylindrical stuff, especially when the cylinder is not perfect, which means that there are a lot of edges right there, and using edge selection is not going to allow us to actually select perfectly. So the only option we have is actually to go manually and select only the surface we need, which covers the circle we are concerned about in order to do supporting edges for. And after that, we're gonna inset in order to get a value that is gonna allow us to actually create a supporting edge that is gonna go all around. And yeah, most of the time we're gonna be able to do it on the border, and from the inner side we're gonna have to select these edges, as you can see here, and we're gonna connect them. And also sometimes you need to do manual selection in order to because the distance most of the time is not going to be perfect, so we're going to have to actually work on it, as you can see here. And we need, of course, to weld the vertices or target weld the vertices that are gonna actually create or form some sorts of triangles that we don't really need or we don't really want to see. So as you can see here, this job or this thing we're working on is kind of looks like it is working, but somehow we need to add more supporting edges, especially to solidify the edges, because there is a lot of strain on the edges. So the Turbo Smooth modifier, what it will do is it will pull everything apart and it will try to smooth things out. And if there are some areas that are not well supported, then it's going to assume that these areas are going to be smooth and are going to be curved, and if we are smart, we are gonna support the edges in the right places in order to see the results that we are aiming for. And here I'm gonna do some manual support because as you can see, sometimes using the Swift loop is gonna be faster, but sometimes when we have patterns of supporting edges, we better use the traditional way of supporting edges, which is using the connect tool and yeah, and so on and so forth. So we better use, the conclusion is we better use both tools, and we better have these both techniques in our arsenal in order to move faster. And when it comes to a shape like this, obviously using the Swift loop is gonna be tremendously faster, and as you can see, it's really quick regardless of using the time lapse. It's it's gonna be super quick, and it's gonna help you deliver the result much faster. I think the supporting edges is a concept that is really easy to understand. It's not something complicated at all. You can grasp it within the first or two times you're gonna see it in front of you, and I think most people don't have trouble with that. Okay, right here, I think we need to actually make this a little bit. We're gonna support it from, especially on the sides. We can actually add some support in the edge right there. It's not gonna hurt, but on the sides, from the left and the right, we need to actually make sure that everything is supported, because as you can see, there are some distortions right there, and the way to eliminate those is to actually reinforce the support from the sides. And when we apply the turbo smooth, we can see that everything looks just fine. All right, so when it comes also to this cylinder or this handle, we're gonna do the same thing. This is gonna be extremely simple. There's no big deal here, but when we apply supporting edges, you can see that there are some weird looking distortions, and we can actually remove these two sides that we don't need. Now we're gonna work on the low poly version. So what we need to do now is actually we need to create two layers, one for the high poly model of the shield and one for the low poly. So one is gonna be high poly, supporting edges and stuff, turbo smooth and everything, and the other is gonna be completely flat. We're gonna remove everything that we don't need, and we're gonna remove everything that is gonna be floating on top, especially these pins and bolts and screws and everything that is gonna be small pieces on the surfaces and kind of extruded areas like bumps and anything that is not gonna be anything that is going to be on surfaces or just kind of carved in surfaces, and especially if it is small or it is something that kind of has quantity of details, and the shape of it is gonna be difficult to kind of create on the high poly, but the cost when it comes to the poly count is going to be super high, and this is going to be a very strong indicator that you need to actually kind of cut it out and don't leave it in the low poly. And the process to create a low poly version is something that is going to be easy to work with, but there are some rules that you need to follow, and they're not kind of they're not, obviously they're not super strict rules, but you don't to follow certain guidelines. For example, first of all, we need to remove a floating geometry that we talked about, and we need to remove the supporting edges. Here I'm trying to remove all the supporting edges that we don't really need, and we're gonna actually these extruded areas and these empty spaces and these carved areas, we don't really need to, because we are gonna cover that in baking. So when we start baking the high poly version on the low poly version of the shield, these details they're gonna actually be brought back, because we're going to use some special maps to do the work that the high poly is going to be doing. And this process here, sometimes it gets a little bit tedious, and it's going to be a little bit kind of repetitive and stuff, and sometimes you need to do some manual management here, because sometimes it's going to be necessary. And also a very quick way to do supporting edges is actually to I would say another effective way to do the conversion from the high poly to the low poly is actually not to convert the model to the high poly in the first place. So when you start working on the high poly version, you're gonna create a copy that is gonna be the low poly. That means that you're not gonna that means that the high poly version that you are gonna create is gonna be supported using support edges and stuff, and the low poly version is gonna be safe in the layer explorer. And the downside to this method, I would say, is that sometimes during the process of supporting the edges in the low poly, in creating the high poly, sorry, you're gonna change stuff, and you're gonna change position in some vertices. Maybe you're gonna move some stuff, maybe you're gonna change the size, maybe you're gonna see that you need some modification to take place. And I would say this is the downside to actually doing this or using this method. Other than that, you're gonna be okay, especially if you know you are for sure you are certain that that whatever you're working on and trying to convert to a high poly version, you're sure that you're not gonna modify or add anything. For now, as you can see, this is gonna be also a piece that we are gonna try to convert to a low poly, and we're gonna remove all the supporting edges, and of course we're gonna remove some edges from the inner side, because there's no need to have so many edges, especially in a sphere like this, or the hemisphere. Or if you are comfortable with the high poly count, you can keep a few of these details, and it's not gonna hurt most of the time, especially if your model is gonna be low, or is gonna be less than 5,000 polygons. You can keep these if you want to, but for convenience and to create something that is gonna be considered clean when it comes to low poly terms, you're gonna be okay with that. All right, so now we're gonna go to UNWRAPPING. So UNWRAPPING is one of the major processes in creating any kind of model, whether it be for game or for anything else. So as you can see, I'm gonna try to unwrap this. I'm gonna try to make it flat. We're gonna start off with the outer edge, or that ring or rim on top of the shield. And it's going to be extremely easy to this shield is going to be extremely easy to unwrap. It's not going to be a big of a deal, not at all. And we're just trying to select all these pieces together. You're going to right click on the menu and stitch selected, and the job is going to be done. This is what you're going to be doing most of the time. Also, you're going to be organizing the pieces, and make sure, of course, to follow the rules that I talked about in a specific video before, which is actually 15 or 16 steps for UNWRAPPING, or rules, or whatever I called them. But they are important, and they are going to help you to achieve the result that you are after. Okay, now I'm trying to actually resize or rescale these elements because because we're gonna apply some a checker material or checker texture, and we better use a checker texture that we are gonna actually download from the internet or we have it somewhere. But we it's not really advised. It's not really recommended to use the checker material or the checker texture that exists inside 3ds Max because it's digital and it's kind of it does not really tell us where the distortions are because it's part of 3D because it's part of 3ds Max and a texture that we bring from the outer side it's not part of 3ds Max or any kind of software. It's not gonna be actually part of the system, and any distortion that is gonna take place is gonna tell us what it is exactly, and it's gonna show us that those details without without kind of without hiding anything or without actually going with the flow of that distortion and showing us a result that looks like everything is okay. Okay, as I said before, most of the unwrapping work is gonna be organization and stitching, the making sure that you're gonna cut everything in the right place, then stitching edges, and maybe making sure that everything is organized. Also, is a big important step, and making sure also that everything is scaled properly when it comes to all the pieces of the same element and when it comes to the element with the rest of the elements. This is also important, and the checker texture, this is one of the major uses for using a checker texture, is gonna actually allow us to tell what is the size of the UV elements for every piece in relation to the rest of the pieces. So if you see that there are some kind of if you see that the checker texture, these patterns are bigger on some element or on some piece and they are smaller on another one, it means that you probably need to go to the UV unwrap modifier, open the UV editor, and change some of these values, or actually change the size of the UV islands inside in order to match, in order to make them all seem the same. Okay, also another thing we need to keep, this is something I talked about a lot, which is to keep the outer edges straight when it comes to the UV islands. You need to make sure to keep all the outer edges straight in order to avoid any kind of scaling effect or something that is gonna look distorted when it comes to baking the maps in Substance Painter. All right, now we need to pack all the elements we unwrapped, and it's not gonna be a big of a deal. It's gonna be super quick. We're gonna do it quickly. So we're gonna try to push all the elements and all the islands inside the 1 by 1 square. All right, we need to find actually the right place for all these elements, and it's not gonna be a hard process, but it's gonna be sometimes tedious to make sure you are kind of not, kind of organizing everything in the right place, and to make sure also that you're not leaving a lot of empty spaces. And sometimes you're gonna find yourself with a very big and long kind of pieces. Sometimes you need to break them in order to keep in order to actually find a right place for these pieces, and make sure you're gonna break it in a way that it's not gonna be visible, because one of the rules I talked about also is to break the UVs in hidden areas where you're not gonna be able to see it, or it's not gonna be as seen as some other areas. Okay, now it's time for baking. So we're gonna open Substance Painter, and we're gonna load the low poly model. And to be honest, I skipped some steps, which is gonna be the naming part. The naming is extremely important because we're going to actually change the suffix of the high poly and the low poly to LP and low poly, or HP high poly, and this is completely depending on you. And we're gonna start baking the maps, as you can see here. So we're gonna bake the normal map, ambient occlusion, and we're gonna bake the rest of the maps. So that was super quick. I talked about that previously, and I created a video about it, so it's there. So right now we're gonna do some texturing, quick texturing. Also, we're gonna drag and drop some smart materials, and we're gonna change some of the values and some of the parameters inside these smart materials. And smart materials are extremely useful, especially if you want to do some quick texturing. Okay, right now we're trying to actually change some of the parameters. We're gonna take a look around, test some of the values and parameters, and try to see what is gonna work best for us. And what is so cool about Substance Painter is it's not like texturing in Photoshop or any other kind of software that is extremely manual, because Substance Painter is highly technical, and for the most part you're gonna be working more with parameters, and sometimes you're gonna use brushes and tools and modify masks and stuff like these. And if you want something basic and simple and quick, I think Substance Painter will help you do the job efficiently. Okay, we're gonna apply actually another piece of smart materials on top of the handle, because I want, even though it's gonna be the same smart material, on top of this handle is gonna be different, because I think the wear and the edge wear effect is gonna be different. The values are gonna be different because the surface is different. Now, after we export the edges, export the texture, sorry, we need to go to Marmoset Toolbag in order to do some lighting and some rendering. So we're gonna import the model, and we're gonna drop the textures that we exported from Substance Painter, and this is gonna be it for the most part. And we're gonna add some lights and stuff. All right, and I've done some videos about it, explaining it, and I'm probably gonna explain it further very soon. So, thanks for watching this video. Please, if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, because there is a lot of cool content coming soon. Yeah, and I will see you very soon in the next one. Take care.